Hello again. I'm Glenna Coleman, Youth Services Librarian, and this is our Library Bear Bear. We're here to bring you a couple of stories about what happens when you let your imagination go. We are going to be reading at the Weathersfield Proctor Library, and I think we're just going to adjust this camera a little bit. Well, our first story about what happens when you let your imagination go is a very well-loved story, and this is called The Story of Ferdinand. Now, this is written by Munro Leaf, and the illustrations are by Robert Lawson. The Story of Ferdinand by Munro Leaf, illustrated by Robert Lawson. Now, I know when we think of traditional picture books, we think of lots of color, but I want you to look at the detail in these illustrations. They're all black and white, but they're quite detailed despite that. So, and pay close attention. See whose imagination you think this story is about. Once upon a time in Spain, there was a little bull, and his name was Ferdinand. All the other little bulls he lived with would run and jump and butt their heads together. But not Ferdinand. He liked to sit just quietly and smell the flowers. He had a favorite spot out in the pasture under a cork tree. It was his favorite tree, and he would sit in its shade all day and smell the flowers. Sometimes his mother, who was a cow, would worry about him. She was afraid he would be lonesome all by himself. "Why don't you run and play with the other little bulls and skip and butt your head?" she would say. Excuse me. But Ferdinand would shake his head. "I like it better where I can just sit quietly and smell the flowers." His mother saw that he was not lonesome, and because she was an understanding mother, even though she was a cow, she let him just sit there and be happy. As the years went by, Ferdinand grew and grew until he was very big and strong. Do you have one of these at your house that marks your growth over the years? All the other bulls who had grown up with him would fight each other all day. They would butt each other and stick each other with their horns. What they wanted most of all was to be picked to fight at the bullfights in Madrid. But not Ferdinand. He still liked to sit just quietly under the cork tree and smell the flowers. One day, 5 men came in very funny hats to pick the fastest, roughest, biggest bull to fight in the bullfights in Madrid. All the other bulls ran around, snorting and butting, leaping and jumping. So the men would think that they were very, very strong and fierce and pick them. Ferdinand knew they wouldn't pick him, and he didn't care. So he went out to his favorite cork tree and sat to sit down. He didn't look where he was sitting, and instead of sitting on the nice cool grass in the shade, he sat on a bumblebee. Well, if you were a bumblebee and a bull sat on you, what would you do? You would sting him, and that is just what this bee did to Ferdinand. Wow, did it hurt! Ferdinand jumped up with a snort. He ran around, puffing and snorting, butting and pawing the ground as if he were crazy. Can you imagine what's going to happen next? The 5 men saw him, and they all shouted with joy. Here was the largest and fiercest bull of all, just the one for the bullfight in Madrid. So they took him away for the bullfight day in a cart. What a day it was! Flags were flying, bands were playing, and all the lovely ladies had flowers in their hair. They had a parade in the bullring. First came the banderilleros with long sharp pins with ribbons on them to stick in the bull and make him mad. Sorry about that word. I don't think I quite got it right there at the end. I'll try to do better with the next one. Next came the picadores, who rode skinny horses, and they had long spears to stick in the bull and make him madder. Then came the matador, the proudest of all. He thought he was very handsome and bowed to the ladies. He had a red cape and a sword and was supposed to stick the bull last of all. Then came the bull, and you know who that was, don't you? Ferdinand. They called him Ferdinand the Fierce, and all the banderilleros were afraid of him, and the picadores were afraid of him, and the matador was scared stiff. Whose imagination is working on this, do you think? Ferdinand ran to the middle of the ring, and everyone shouted and clapped because they thought he was going to fight fiercely and butt and snort and stick his horns around. Oh, sorry, there's Ferdinand in the middle of the ring. But not Ferdinand. When he got to the middle of the ring, he saw the flowers in all the lovely ladies' hair, and he just sat down quietly and smelled. He wouldn't fight and be fierce no matter what they did. He just sat and smelled. And the banderilleros were mad, and the picadores were madder, and the matador was so mad he cried because he couldn't show off with his cape and sword. So they had to take Ferdinand home. And for all I know, he is sitting there still, under his favorite cork tree, smelling the flowers just quietly. He is very happy. The end. Well, I hope you enjoyed the story of Ferdinand by Munro Leaf, illustrated by Robert Lawson, and I hope you can figure out whose imagination was working overtime in this story. Well, this is quite a different story of imagination. This story is by Alice McLerran, illustrated by Barbara Cooney, and it's called Roxaboxen. There's the back dust jacket of the book. Roxaboxen by Alice McLerran, illustrated by Barbara Cooney. What do you think the setting of this story is? If you guessed the desert, you are right. I'm going to scoot around so I can see all the words. This one has a few more, and make sure you can see the pictures. Marian called it Roxaboxen. She always knew the name of everything. There across the road it looked like any rocky hill, nothing but sand and rocks, some old wooden boxes, cactus and grease wood and thorny ocotillo, but it was a special place. The street between Roxaboxen and the houses curved like a river, so Marian named it the River Road. After that, you had to ford a river to reach Roxaboxen. Of course, all of Marian's sisters came, Anna May and Frances and little Jean. Charles, from next door, even though he was 12. Oh, and Eleanor, naturally, and Jamie with his brother Paul. Later on there were others, but these were the first. Well, not really the first. Roxaboxen had always been there and must have belonged to others long before. When Marian dug up a tin box filled with round black pebbles, everyone knew what it was. It was a buried treasure. Those pebbles were the money of Roxaboxen. You could still find others like them if you looked hard enough. So some days became treasure hunting days, with everybody trying to find that special kind. And then on other days, you might just find one without even looking. The town of Roxaboxen began to grow, traced in lines of stone. Main Street first, edged with the whitest ones, and then the houses. Charles made his of the biggest stones. After all, he was the oldest. At first the houses were very plain, but soon they all began to add more rooms. The old wooden boxes could be shelves or tables or anything you wanted. You could find pieces of pottery for dishes. Round pieces were best. Later on, there was a town hall. Marian was mayor, of course. That was just the way she was. Nobody minded. After a while, they added other streets. Frances moved to one of them and built herself a new house outlined in desert glass. Bits of amber, amethyst, and sea green. A house of jewels. And because everybody had plenty of money, there were plenty of shops. Jean helped Anna May in the bakery, pies and cakes and bread baked warm in the sun. There were 2 ice cream parlors. Was Paul's ice cream the best or Eleanor's? Everybody kept trying them both. In Roxaboxen, you can eat all the ice cream you want. Imagination is wonderful, isn't it? Everybody had a car. All you needed was something round for a steering wheel. Of course, if you broke the speed limit, you had to go to jail. The jail had cactus on the floor to make it uncomfortable. And Jamie was the policeman. Anna May, little quiet Anna May, was always speeding. You'd think she liked to go to jail. But if you had a horse, you could go as fast as the wind. There were no speed limits for horses, and you didn't have to stay on the roads. All you needed for a horse was a stick and some kind of bridle, and you could gallop anywhere. Sometimes there were wars. Once there was a great war, boys against girls. Charles and Marion were the generals. The girls had Fort Irene, and they were all Girl Scouts. The boys made a fort at the other end of Roxaboxen, and they were all bandits. Oh, the raids were fierce, loud with whooping and the stamping of horses. The whirling of swords of Ocotillo had sharp thorns. But when you reached your fort, you were safe. Roxaboxen had a cemetery in case anyone died, but the only grave in it was for a dead lizard. Every year when the cactus bloomed, they decorated the grave with flowers. Sometimes in the winter, when everybody was at school and the weather was bad, no one went to Roxaboxen at all, not for weeks and weeks, but it didn't matter. Roxaboxen was always waiting. Roxaboxen was always there. And spring came, and the Ocotillo blossomed, and everybody sucked the honey from its flowers. And everybody built new rooms, and everybody decided to have jeweled windows. That summer there were 3 new houses on the east slope and 2 new shops on Main Street. And so it went. The seasons changed and the years went by. Roxaboxen was always there. The years went by and the seasons changed until at last the friends had all grown tall, and one by one they moved away to other houses, to other towns. So you might think that was the end of Roxaboxen, but oh no, because none of them ever forgot Roxaboxen. Not one of them ever forgot. Years later, Marion's children listened to stories of that place and fell asleep dreaming dreams of Roxaboxen. Gray-haired Charles picked up a black pebble on the beach and stood holding it, remembering Roxaboxen. More than 50 years later, Frances went back, and Roxaboxen was still there. She could see the white stones bordering Main Street, and there where she had built her house, the desert glass still glowed, amethyst, amber, and sea green. Well, what a place to use your imagination. I hope you enjoyed Roxaboxen by Alice